Review and the recap for some of you and the first information for others. This week, the training topic we wanted to hone in on and then talk about with the group is helping mentees cultivate hope. A few of you might remember our previous training was on helping mentees communicate their needs. So we really broke down what does it look like to be a peer support volunteer, walking a mentee through their needs if they're dealing with post-concussion syndrome, if they're a patient, if they're a caregiver, if they're a CTE caregiver. We really broke it down into minute details and some tools to help them communicate. We want to do a very similar thing with helping these mentees cultivate hope and create environments in which hope can thrive. And this training topic is based off of the National Mentoring Partnerships National Mentoring Summit. So we were fortunate to attend some of their fantastic trainings in January. And this was a training hosted by Ellen Kesselman, PhD, and the title of the training was Cultivating Hope, Evidence-Based Methods to Support Mentees in Change and Challenges. And what we've done is adapted what was a long and really informative training from Dr. Kesselman into something that can be used in the CLF Mentorship program for folks dealing with the long-term and short-term consequences of brain trauma. I just wanted to give you all a quick overview of Dr. Kesselman's background. She is the Arkansas Program Director for Reach and Rise, which is a YMCA mentoring program for youth, and that's funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Her background's in education and psychology, and a strong emphasis on researching cognitive behavioral methods. So Dr. Kesselman is focused a lot on youth, but there's a lot of lessons in her work that we've been able to incorporate for the CLF mentorship program, which of course we talked about was all age groups earlier, but lots of lessons that apply even to adult relationships as well. So starting off with a agreed upon, or let's all define what hope means for the purposes of this conversation. So if we're thinking about hope, not just the emotion or the idea, but what is it practically or functionally, we can think of it as the perceived capability to drive pathways to desired goals. So in other words, that's our thoughts about how to make things happen. So for this conversation, we're thinking about what hope is and how it's having goal-oriented thoughts, developing strategies to work towards those goals, creating motivation and sustaining motivation to move towards those things, and then believing that our actions can make a difference. While hope, in the big picture, it is optimism, it is keeping a dream alive. In the purpose of this conversation, what we are trying to engage with, we want to think a little bit more specifically. So it's not just optimism or a dream. It's something that we can strive towards, work towards, really cultivate in a practical way, and not just in a positive thinking kind of way. And this next slide might be a little bit overwhelming, but we wanted to touch on something called hope theory, which was a breakdown of how hope moves from the idea to the reality phase. And bear with me, I promise I'll make this make sense in just a second. On the left side here, we're going to move our way left to right, are the experiences that we've had throughout our lives that shape how we perceive a goal, how we perceive something that we would like to happen, or something that we would like out of an effort. So on the top here, you can see pathway thoughts. And these are lessons that we've learned growing up or in our adult lives about correlation and causality. So we can think of that as how A becomes B. I can have a thought about how if I go for a run, then I might become better at cardio. Or if I go for a run, I might discover that my cardio is horrendous. And either one of those thoughts is about causality. It's if I run, I will have good cardio and build on it, or if I run, I'm going to have a lot of pain in my chest and lightheadedness and dizziness. And we form thoughts and we form ideas about the pathways to achieve something. So my goal and my hope was to be in great cardiovascular shape. I might have a pathway thought that, maybe running isn't the best way. Maybe I try something different. A related but separate idea and an element of how we move towards a goal is our agency thoughts. And so these are lessons that we learn about ourselves and our ability to shape chains of events. So our ability to affect change in our own lives and to have some kind of an impact on an outcome. And this is our learning history. This is what we have throughout our lives experienced and has shaped how we perceive both how and if we're capable of moving towards a goal. And those converge into our perception. And that's what this pre-event expectations is here as we move down the chain in our beliefs and our hopes. Our experiences shape our expectations and our perceptions of our pursuit of that goal. And then once we actually begin to pursue it, and that's this event sequence here, those perceptions become reality. And it's going to inform whether or not that goal behavior or that goal action or whatever it is we're striving towards is something that we make some progress towards, or we stay neutral, or we feel like we've slid backwards a little bit. And what ends up happening is there's a positive or a negative reinforcement of these as our pursuit of that goal plays out. So we move along from our experiences to our perceptions to our attempts towards a goal. And then if we are successful and I have achieved really good, cardiovascular strength, I'll think, wow, okay, running was the way to do it. Or if we are not successful, we'll think, wow, running was definitely not the way to do it, but am I even able to do it? Or is there another way to do it? Does another one exist? Those are the types of thoughts. And we just want, I know this is, as I said, theoretical and a bit complex, but it's great for us as volunteers to just have that idea about the loop. So the base here is how we approach these things, the pathways thoughts and the agency thoughts, and then recognizing that there can be a loop, and that's our starting point that it loops back to. So now we move on to so what? With that kind of complicated and convoluted graphic, what does that mean for us as peer support volunteers and how we can actually help our mentees? And the simple starting point is just to know that those pathways thoughts, so the how you do something, and the agency thoughts, the fact that you can do something, those are the areas that we want to be helping mentees grow in. Because one without the other may create an environment where they aren't feeling like they are moving in the direction that they want to be. Sometimes one without the other just works because it's not something that they need to control, but other times one without the other is a hindrance. So as peer support volunteers, we want to help them grow in both of those areas. We want to teach them how to do, and we want to teach them that they can do, or if not teach, remind them. And we can also identify a negative loop. If we're having a conversation with a mentee and they're just walking through their perception of how their experiences are going, we can identify a negative loop and we can let them know, hey, this definitely isn't your fault. Some things are out of our control. Some things are in our control. And this may be a negative reinforcement. You might have a perception about this experience you're having that we could challenge and we could come at from a different angle, and we can help them divide those big problems into smaller chunks to make them more manageable. And just to be a little bit more clear with some examples, So some example pathways thoughts, how can we teach a mentee to take an action, or what actions can we teach them to take? You can, for example, recommend a support group you were in, something if you were feeling lonely or isolated that helped you feel more connected or integrated into a community. Or another, if you hear a mentee talk about how they feel like they're kind of chaotic and disorganized and they're having trouble keeping track of things, scheduling out your days and weeks is another pathway. It's not a perfect solution, but it's one of the options that we can recommend, we can bring up, and we can say, okay, this is a way. It may not be the way, but it's worth trying. It's a way. And then we also have examples of agency thoughts. And as a reminder, these are the thoughts that, if I act, I can have an impact. We do keep in mind and want to make sure, everyone is very sensitive to the fact that the PCS and CTE community in particular does exist in the sphere where some things are outside of our control. But for the things that are, we want to make sure that we're creating the environment that if there are things within our control, we can move towards creating progress and momentum towards those things. So I just want to pause here because I know we've thrown out a lot, and ask if anybody in the group, a PCS former patient or caregiver or CTE caregiver, would be willing to provide an example of that type of agency thought, something where it's my actions can have an impact. So if anyone's feeling brave just to try and shout one out, we'd be very grateful for your participation. Or a question, if anyone has a question.
So I had an experience actually today with my mentee where we were talking about her struggling to find a mental health professional who could kind of hold space for her unique experience. The two people she had been referred to were not as helpful as she had hoped, and she was starting to get not some hopelessness, but definite frustration. So we spent some time kind of problem solving through, okay, well, where are places we could go to look for someone who could help you? So we talked about going on Psychology Today, kind of finding some small steps that she could take, and talked about, when you reach out to someone to talk about whether or not they're a good fit, maybe ask if they've had experience with someone who's had a traumatic brain injury or a concussion, and see if that would allow them to be a better fit for you. And I think breaking it down into small digestible steps of things that she could do helped alleviate some of her frustration and the little bit of hopelessness at how the system wasn't really helping her find someone to support her that way.
That's great. Thank you, Jamie. That's a perfect example. It's a great example of both, actually, the pathway thought and the agency thought. Jamie, the volunteer, can show you how, and then in doing that, we're also going to show and talk about how you can make an impact and you can take a step. So a great example. Thank you. And we will have more questions for everyone later and for more participation, and we will of course be open to questions. But moving on to how we put this in practice with a tactic. So thank you for bearing with me for that theory portion, and now this is the in practice, hope theory, so what? This final part, really making the rubber meet the road. How would we, through an exercise or a tool with a mentee, make this process a little bit more clear and real to them? So it's a fun tool called Hope Realization Ladders. They're not for everyone. It's mostly supposed to be a visualization. So if you think that you are working with a mentee who'd be open to it, go for it. But the basic explanation of the Hope Realization Ladder is that you have 4 categories, and we've adjusted them slightly for CLF's needs. And across those 4 categories, you ask the mentee to think about where they would place themselves on the ladder. Super high up means life is right where they want it to be. So in work, or their education, if they're still a student, leisure, their health and recovery journey, or their relationships. These will be tweaked slightly for caregivers versus patients. But across these categories, you ask them basically to just place themselves high up or low down, and that will tell you if their perception, their self-perception of where they want to be is up high, or if it's down low, if it's right in the middle. And it's a great way to identify starting points. So right off the bat, it's a great way to prioritize some conversations or some questions with a mentee, to be asking them. So how can we think about the way you feel about relationships, and you're wanting more out of your friendships or your professional relationships, or out of the support relationships you have through your recovery journey. And in addition to helping prioritize, because you can see when one's really low compared to the others, it's a great foothold for getting deeper in on why that item falls where it does. If you want to talk about something that's really high up on the ladder, that's great. You definitely should, and ask specific questions about, that's really awesome that you feel like you are getting the leisure that you need and the space for yourself. Could you tell me a little bit more about that? Or if they're low down, we can also ask them a whole bunch of who, what, where, when, and why questions, to not dissect, but piece out the different elements of how they feel. So come at it from different angles. If they're feeling hopeless about the state of their relationships, you don't want to just say, well, it will get better. You can say something or ask something like, well, who would you like to have a better relationship with, or what makes good relationships, or how would having good relationships be different than what you're experiencing now? Really come at it from a whole bunch of different angles. And if you get to the point where you feel like you really understand what they mean, and they're starting to really understand what they feel, you can brainstorm some pathways together to help make a bit of progress and move up. And over time, if this is an exercise that you do with someone, at the 3-month mark, and at the 6-month mark, it's a good way to say, like, hey, well, you made a little bit of progress on relationships because you and I have a great relationship, and we really know each other well now, and we can move forward into the future, and still be good friends, connected, and support each other. So we do have the blank template, and we will keep that and send that around for everyone in the email if anyone wants to use that in one of their upcoming connections. And we hope you guys get as much use out of it and have as much fun with it as we did when we were learning about it. To round out the portion of the training where we keep talking, and before we kick off the portion where we want to hear a lot more from you guys, we just wanted to list a couple things to keep in mind that we've learned over the course of the mentorship program that have been really helpful for cultivating an environment where hope can flourish and blossom, excuse me. And it may sound strange, but a great one is to avoid sarcasm and double meaning in your conversations and in your language. It just reduces the amount of questions and second guessing in a relationship. And when we're asking someone to talk with us about how to be hopeful, it can be a vulnerable conversation, and you want to do everything you can to make sure they feel secure in that. And one of the ways is just be direct, even if it's humorous and lighthearted. It does help to be direct. We also a reminder that everyone knows optimism and positivity is infectious. So that's not to say you can't share your difficulties with your mentee, but whenever possible, taking the relentless optimism approach is a great way to keep momentum going. There's more on that in our training document, which many of you have worked through. Listening, as always, a really good principle is one of the best things that you can do, and just ask questions to help mentees piece things together on their own goes much further than giving them a way to do something. And then you won't always say the right thing. So don't be afraid to share something from your heart, and share something from your own experiences, for fear of it being the wrong thing to say. Not everyone gets it right all the time, and we just do the best that we can. So with